I spent 12 long years building an empire across the ocean, solely to give my daughter the life of a queen. I imagine our reunion 1,000 times, the hugs, the tears of joy, the celebration. But when I finally walked through the doors of the mansion I paid for, I didn't find a princess waiting for me. I found a slave. There she was, my little girl, on her knees, scrubbing the dirt off the marble floors, covered in bruises, wearing a filthy rag that marked her as property. And the husband I trusted protect her? He was living like a king on my money, treating her worse than a stray dog. He thought I was just a helpless old man. He had no idea who just walked into his house. What I did next, let's just say, it was the most satisfying revenge of my entire life. Welcome back to Inspiration Seeker. If you believe that justice always finds a way, hit that subscribe button, smash the like, and comment down below. Family first. Now, let me tell you how I took everything back. The wheels of my Gulfstream G650 touched down on the tarmac at JFK Airport under a gray, drizzling New York sky. It was the first time I had breathed American air in over a decade, 12 years. That's how long I had been away in Europe, tirelessly expanding Vance Global from a successful company into a trillion-dollar empire. I had sacrificed birthdays, holidays, and precious time, all to ensure that my only daughter, Lily, would never have to worry about a single thing for the rest of her life. My assistant offered to call the limousine service, but I raised my hand to stop him. "No," I said, adjusting the collar of my coat. "I'll take a regular taxi. I want this to be a complete surprise." I hailed a yellow cab, tossing my leather satchel onto the worn back seat. Inside that bag was a velvet folder containing a deed to a private island in the Mediterranean, a birthday gift for Lily. I smiled to myself as the taxi merged onto the highway, heading toward the Hamptons. I pictured the look on her face. I pictured Brad, her husband, shaking my hand with that charming smile of his. I had given Brad everything: the CEO position of my domestic branch, access to my accounts, and most importantly, the hand of my daughter. I trusted him to be the man of the house, while I conquered the global market. However, as the city skyline faded behind us and we entered the lush, tree-lined roads of the Hamptons, that smile began to fade from my face. A strange, heavy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It was an intuition, a cold whisper in the back of my mind that I couldn't quite silence. Over the last 6 months, Lily's video calls had become infrequent. When we did speak, the camera was always angled strangely or the connection was bad, and she always seemed to be in a rush. "She's just busy managing the charity foundations, Arthur," I told myself, trying to dismiss the anxiety. "Brad is taking good care of her." But as the taxi turned onto the long, winding private driveway leading to the Vance estate, my heart started pounding against my ribs. The golden gates, usually polished to a shine, looked dull. The beautiful landscaping I remembered seemed overgrown. I paid the driver and stepped out, standing alone in front of the massive home I had built. The silence was deafening. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a fortress keeping a dark secret. I took a deep breath, gripped my bag tighter, and walked toward the front door, unaware that my entire world was about to shatter. I stood before the massive oak front door, my finger hovering over the digital keypad. I punched in the security code, my daughter's birthday. A harsh red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again. Access denied. A frown deepened on my forehead. Why would they change the master code? I pushed down the rising panic and walked around to the side of the estate, slipping through an old service gate that I knew the gardeners often left unlatched. It creaked open, and I stepped onto manicured lawn, making my way toward the French doors that led directly into the grand living room. Fortunately, the latch on the glass door was broken, a security flaw I had meant to fix years ago, but today it was my way in. I slid the door open silently and stepped inside. I expected to hear music, laughter, or perhaps the sound of servants preparing for a dinner party. Instead, the house was tomb silent. The air didn't smell like fresh flowers or expensive perfume as it used to. It smelled of harsh bleach and chemical cleaners. I walked softly across the Persian rug, my eyes scanning the room. That's when I saw movement near the grand staircase. At first glance, I thought it was a hired cleaner from an agency. A woman was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the white marble floor with a coarse brush. She was dressed in rags, a tattered gray dress that hung loosely on her skeletal frame, stained with grime and sweat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Is Mrs. Hamilton home?" The woman froze. Her shoulders stiffened, not in a way that suggested surprise, but in a way that screamed sheer terror. She didn't stand up to greet me. Instead, she lowered her head further, scrubbing harder, as if her life depended on removing an invisible spot. "I asked you a question," I said, taking a step closer, annoyed by the lack of response. Slowly, terrifyingly slowly, she turned her head toward me. When the light from the chandelier hit her face, the bag dropped from my hand with a heavy thud. The breath was knocked out of my lungs, as if I had been punched in the gut. It wasn't a stranger. It was Lily. But it wasn't the vibrant, healthy young woman I had left behind. Her cheeks were sunken. Her skin was pale and waxy, and a dark, purple bruise bloomed across her left cheekbone. Her beautiful hair had been hacked off unevenly. But the thing that broke me, the thing that made my vision blur with red-hot rage, was a humiliating apron tied around her waist. In crude black marker, someone had written, "The Hamilton Slave." She looked at me with hollow, dead eyes, not even recognizing her own father through her fear. She flinched as I took a step forward, raising her hands to protect her face. I'm sorry. I'll clean it faster," she whimpered, her voice raspy and broken. My heart didn't just break in that moment. It was incinerated. "Lily!" I wanted to shout. I wanted to rush forward and wrap her in my arms. But the words died in my throat as the double doors swung open with a violent crash. In walked the man I had entrusted with my most precious treasure, Brad. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit that cost more than most people earn in a year, paid for my dividends, and beside him was his mother, Eleanor, dripping in diamonds that belonged to my late wife. They didn't even acknowledge my presence. Their eyes were fixed entirely on the trembling woman on the floor. Without a word of warning, Brad wound back his leg and kicked the bucket of dirty water Lily was using. Clang! The metal bucket skidded across the floor, splashing gray, murky water all over Lily's rags and the polished marble she had just spent hours cleaning. "Look at this mess," Eleanor shrieked, her voice shrill and piercing like nails on a chalkboard. "You useless waste of space. Now you have to do it all over again. This floor better be dry before the guests arrive, or you'll be sleeping in the kennel tonight." Lily didn't fight back. She didn't argue. She just scrambled to pick up the sponge, trembling like a leaf in a storm, whispering apologies to the floor. My blood boiled. The red haze of rage was blinding me. I took a heavy step forward, ready to tear them apart with my bare hands, ready to end their lives right there, when Brad finally swiveled his head and noticed me. He looked me up and down with a sneer of absolute disgust. I was wearing comfortable, nondescript travel clothes, a simple canvas jacket, a flat cap pulled low, and I hadn't shaved in days during my final intense negotiations in Zurich. To a narcissist like Brad, who only saw brand and labels, I looked like nobody. "Who the hell are you?" Brad barked. Then, a look of realization crossed his arrogant face. "Oh, right. The temp agency. They said they were sending a replacement groundskeeper today, since the last one quit." He laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "They sent me a geriatric? You look old, Grandpa. I hope your back is stronger than it looks." He grabbed a dirty rag from a nearby table and threw it at me. It hit my chest and felt the floor. "Don't just stand there gawking. Old man, help this slave clean up the mess you made. And if you steal anything, I'll have you arrested before you can blink." I stood there frozen. My fists were clenched so hard inside my pockets that my fingernails were drawing blood. Every instinct screamed at me to reveal myself, to scream, "I am Arthur Vance, and I own you." But the businessman in me, the cold, calculating strategist who had destroyed competitors for breakfast, took over. If I revealed myself now, it would be a chaotic brawl. They might lie, cover their tracks, or claim Lily was mentally unstable. No, I needed to see the full extent of their depravity. I needed to gather enough ammunition to bury them so deep, they would never see the sun again. I lower my head, hiding the fire in my eyes under the brim of my cap. Yes, sir. I rasped, deliberately making my voice sound rough and subservient. The name's Artie. I'll get right to work. For the next 24 hours, I lived a double life. To the world, I was Artie, the hunched-over, silent handyman. But inside, I was a father watching a horror movie starring his own child. It took every ounce of my willpower not to snap Brad's neck every time he opened his mouth. I had to force myself to watch, to catalog every sin, so that when the hammer finally fell, there would be no escape for them. The things I witnessed in that house will haunt me until my dying day. Lily didn't just clean, she was erased. I watched her scrub the toilets with a toothbrush while Eleanor stood in the doorway, drinking my vintage wine and criticizing Lily's posture. I saw Brad throw a plate of filet mignon against the wall because it was too cold, and then force Lily to clean it up. But the worst part wasn't the labor. It was the hunger. That evening, I was tending to the indoor plants in the dining room, making myself invisible. Brad and Eleanor sat at the long mahogany table, feasting on a lavish spread of roasted duck and truffle risotto. Lily stood in the corner, head bowed, hands clasped behind her back, waiting for orders like a piece of furniture. "I'm done," Eleanor announced, pushing her half-eaten plate away. "Throw this out, girl." Lily stepped forward, her eyes darting to the food. I saw her throat bob as she swallowed. She was starving. As she reached for the plate, her hand shook. "Actually," Brad sneered, stopping her, "you can have it, if you eat it off the floor." My grip on the pruning shears tightened, so hard the metal handle bent. I watched, tears stinging my eyes behind my dirty glasses, as my daughter, the heir to the Vance fortune, hesitated, then slowly lowered herself. She began to pick at the scraps. "Look at her," Eleanor laughed, sipping her wine. "This house is officially Hamilton territory now. The Vance legacy is nothing but memory. She's just a parasite we're generous enough to keep around. Why didn't she recognize me?" I asked myself that question in agony. But I realized the truth. I had changed physically, yes, with my heavy beard and gray hair, but it was more than that. Lily had been broken so thoroughly that she had stopped looking at people's faces. She only looked at their shoes. She had been conditioned to believe she was invisible, so she made herself invisible. I retreated to the servants' quarters at night, my body shaking not from age, but from a rage so cold it burned. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken the Vance spirit, but they had made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that before I was a businessman, I was a father, and tomorrow, the bill for their cruelty would come due. The house finally fell into a heavy, drunken silence around 2 a.m. I waited in the shadows of the hallway until the snoring from a master bedroom, my bedroom, now occupied by those parasites, echoed through the upper floor. Moving with the stealth of a ghost, I crept toward the east wing of the mansion. This was where my private study was located, the command center from which I had built an empire. I pushed the heavy oak doors open. The room was unrecognizable. My classic, understated mahogany furniture had been replaced by tacky, gold-plated monstrosities. The shelves, once filled with literature and business journals, were now lined with sports memorabilia and expensive liquor bottles. It smelled of stale cigar smoke and arrogance. I sat in the leather chair behind the desk, a throne Brad clearly thought he deserved, and woke up the computer. A simple password prompt appeared. Knowing Brad's shallow intellect, I guessed he wouldn't use complex encryption. I tried his birthday. Incorrect. I tried millionaire. Access granted. Pathetic. I began to dig, and what I found was worse than simple greed. It was systematic dismantling. I pulled up the banking records and watched the numbers blur. Over the last 3 years, Brad had drained Lily's trust fund almost entirely. I found transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, massive payments to high-stakes casinos in Las Vegas, and receipts for jewelry purchased for women who were definitely not my daughter. Then I found the legal documents. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened a file labeled conservatorship. There were scanned documents with Lily's signature at the bottom, but the handwriting was shaky, forced, clearly forged or signed under extreme duress. He had declared her mentally incompetent, granting him full power of attorney over the Vance estate. He had legally enslaved her in her own home. But the final nail in his coffin was an email draft I found open on the screen. It was a speech he was preparing for tomorrow night. The subject line read, "Victory Party, the Acquisition." I skimmed the text and nearly laughed out loud in the dark. Brad was planning to announce a partnership with Vance Global. He believed that would be out of the picture in Europe. He could manipulate the board into a hostile takeover, using Lily shares as leverage. He was throwing a party to celebrate stealing my company, using my money in my house. I pulled a flash drive from my pocket and copied everything. Every bank transfer, every forged document, every incriminating email. As the download bar reached 100%, a cold smile touched my lips. Brad wanted a show. He wanted to make a big announcement in front of the New York elite. Fine, I would give him a show. But the ending wasn't going to be the one he wrote. As twilight fell over the Hamptons, the estate transformed into a carnival of vanity. Limousines snaked up the driveway like a parade of shiny beetles, depositing the creme de la creme of New York society onto my doorstep. Senators, hedge fund managers, tech moguls, people I had done business with for decades, poured into the garden, sipping my vintage champagne and admiring the lights strung up in the trees. I recognized nearly every face, yet not a single one of them spared a glance for Artie, the hunched-over old man sweeping stray leaves near the patio. The atmosphere was electric with greed, but for me, it was suffocating. Brad was in his element. He moved through the crowd like a predator, shaking hands and flashing that $1,000,000 smile, soaking up the admiration. Eleanor was holding court near the fountain, telling anyone who would listen how difficult it was to manage such a large estate all on her own. And then there was Lily. They had forced her into a crisp black and white, maid's uniform, a cruel parody of service. She moved through the crowd with a silver tray of hors d'oeuvres, her head bowed low. I watched from the shadows of a trellis, my heart twisting as I overheard the whispers of the guests. Isn't that Lily Vance?" A woman in a red dress whispered behind her fan. "It is," her husband replied, swirling his drink. I heard she had a complete mental breakdown after her father left. Brad is a saint for keeping her here. Most men would have institutionalized her by now. A saint. The word tasted like bile in my mouth. They had spun a narrative so perfect, so insidious, that society actually pitted the monster and shunned the victim. Around 9 p.m., the music lowered. A spotlight hit the center of the terrace, where Brad stood on a raised dais, holding a microphone. He looked a picture of success. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brad boomed, his voice oozing false charm. "Thank you for coming tonight. We are not just celebrating a party. We are celebrating the future. As many of you know, Vance Global has been stagnant. But under my upcoming leadership and with the acquisition I am finalizing this week, we are entering a new era." The crowd applauded politely. Brad beamed, raising his glass high. "To the Hamilton Empire," he shouted. "To the Hamilton Empire," the crowd echoed. I gripped the handle of my broom until my knuckles turned white. He was toasting to my grave while standing on my soil. He thought he was the king of the world. He had no idea that the Real King was standing 10 feet away, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The party was just getting started, but the fun was about to end. The applause was still rippling through the crowd when the atmosphere shifted. It happened in slow motion. Lily, exhausted and likely dehydrated, was navigating to the tight cluster of guests near the stage. As she tried to maneuver around a heavy velvet rope, the heel of her worn-out shoe caught the edge of the patio rug. She stumbled. For a split second, she tried to correct her balance, but the heavy silver tray laden with crystal champagne flutes was too much. Crash! The sound of breaking glass shattered the festive mood instantly. A cascade of expensive champagne drenched the front row, specifically Eleanor Hamilton. The music cut out. The chatter died. All eyes turned to the scene. Eleanor stood there, her imported silk gown dripping with sticky, golden liquid. Her face turned a shade of crimson that matched the drapes. "You clumsy, useless cow," Eleanor screeched, her voice echoing across the silent garden. Before Lily could even scramble to her knees to apologize, Eleanor lunged forward. Smack! The sound of her hand connecting with Lily's face cracked through the air like a whip. The force of the blow sent Lily sprawling backward onto the shards of broken glass. The crowd gasped, but nobody moved. Nobody helped. They just watched, paralyzed by the spectacle. "Mother, are you okay?" Brad rushed down from the stage, his face contorted not with concern for his wife, but with blind fury at the humiliation. He looked at the stain on his mother's dress, then down at Lily, who was sobbing silently, clutching her cheek. "You ruined it," Brad hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm trying to build an empire, and you're throwing drinks on the guests? You need to be taught a lesson that you won't forget." He raised his hand high, his fist clenched, aiming for a blow that would likely send her to the hospital. Lily squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the impact. That was the moment the businessman died, and the father took over. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I moved. I burst from the shadows of the trellis, covering the distance in 3 long strides. Just as Brad's arm came swinging down, I intercepted it, my hand clamped around his wrist with the force of a steel vise. The impact jarred his entire body. Brad froze, his eyes bulging in shock. He looked down, expecting to see security, but instead he saw the dirty, bearded gardener he had mocked earlier. But this time, the gardener wasn't looking at his shoes. I was looking straight into his soul. "Let go of me, you filth." Brad struggled, trying to yank his arm back, but I didn't budge an inch. "I suggest you don't do that," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register that cut through the silence. "Because if you touch her one more time, you're going to lose a hand." "Unhand me, you geriatric lunatic," Brad screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of panic and rage. He thrashed like a trapped animal, but I didn't move. My grip was iron. Security guards began to rush toward the stage, their radios crackling. The crowd rippled with uneasy murmurs. To them, this was a scandal, a deranged employee attacking the host. But then, a voice cut through the chaos from the front row. It was Senator Sterling, a man I had played golf with for 20 years. "Wait!" the senator shouted, stepping forward, squinting through the dim lights. "Hold the security. Look at him. Look at his eyes." Brad stopped struggling, confused. I shoved him backward with a force that sent him stumbling into the drum kit. Crash! The cymbal fell over, ringing out into the dead silence. I stood tall, straightening my spine and shedding the hunch I had faked for 2 days. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and pulled off the grime-stained flat cap. I removed the thick, dirty spectacles and tossed them onto the table. I ran a hand through my gray hair, staring daggers at the man who had tormented my child. "You call me a peasant, Brad," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the garden without the need for a microphone. "You call me a waste of space." An interesting choice of words. I took a step toward him. "Considering you were standing on my stage, drinking my wine, and raising a hand against my daughter." A collective gasp swept through the crowd like a shock wave. You could hear a pin drop on the grass. The color drained from Brad's face, so fast he looked like a ghost. He stammered, his arrogance dissolving into pure terror. "Eh, Arthur? But you're in Europe. You're supposed to be—" "Gone." I finished his sentence cold as ice. "Dead? Out of the way so you could steal my company." I turned to the crowd, my eyes scanning the faces of the people who had watched Lily suffer and done nothing. I am Arthur Vance, and every single person who stood by and watched this man abuse my daughter is complicit. Then I turned to the only person who mattered. Lily was still on the ground, staring up at me, her hands trembling over her mouth. Her eyes searched my face, looking for the father she thought had abandoned her. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My anger vanished instantly, replaced by a wave of sorrow. I fell to my knees, not to scrub a floor, but to hold my child. "I'm here, Lily," I choked out, pulling her into my arms. "I'm home, and nobody is ever going to hurt you again." As I held Lily, wailing sirens cut through the night air. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. I had triggered the silent panic alarm in my pocket the moment I stepped onto the stage. Blue and red lights began to flash against the trees, casting chaotic shadows over the terrified guests. Brad tried to scramble backward, his hands held up in a pathetic surrender. Arthur, wait. Please. It's not what it looks like. She's sick, Arthur. We were trying to help her. This is all a misunderstanding. I stood up, helping Lily to a chair, and wiped a tear from her cheek. Then I turned to projector screen behind the stage, the one Brad had set up for his vanity speech. A misunderstanding? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Let's let the audience decide. I pulled the flash drive from my pocket and plugged it into the laptop on the podium. Suddenly, the giant screen flickered to life. But instead of a graph showing profits, a grainy CCTV video appeared. It showed yesterday morning. The entire crowd watched in horrified silence as the video showed Brad kicking the water bucket over Lily's feet. Then it cut to the dinner scene, showing Eleanor laughing while Lily ate scraps off the floor. Then it cycled through the bank statements, millions of dollars siphoned into Brad's personal gambling accounts. The collective gasp from the crowd sucked the air out of the garden. The saint narrative was obliterated. You didn't just abuse my daughter, I said into the microphone, looking down at Brad, who was now shaking uncontrollably. You forged documents. You committed wire fraud. You embezzled corporate funds. And you did it all across state lines. A team of officers, followed by agents and FBI windbreakers, swarmed the patio. I had sent the evidence to my contacts at the Bureau hours ago. Brad Hamilton, you are under arrest, an agent announced, slamming Brad against the very dais he had been bragging on. Eleanor, realizing the game was up, tried one last desperate act. She clutched her chest, fluttering her eyes. Oh, my heart, I'm fainting. She collapsed dramatically onto the grass. Get her up, I told the officers, not even blinking. She can get medical attention in the prison infirmary. As they dragged Brad away in cuffs, he was weeping, snot running down his face, begging the guests, his friends, to help him. But nobody moved. The senator, the investors, the socialites, they all turned their backs, disgusted. I walked up to Brad one last time as they shoved him toward the squad car. I leaned in close, so only he could hear. You wanted to live like a Vance? Now you're going to rot like a Hamilton. It has been 2 months since the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from my driveway. The silence in the Vance estate is different now. It isn't the heavy, suffocating silence of fear. It is a calm, breathing silence of peace. The first thing I did the next morning was hire a demolition crew. I didn't just want to clean the house. I wanted to purge it. Every piece of furniture Brad had purchased, every gaudy painting Eleanor had hung, and even the marble floors Lily had been forced to scrub, I had it all ripped out. I wanted every physical trace of the Hamiltons erased from our lives, treated like the trash they were. As for Brad and Eleanor, they are currently sitting in a maximum security holding cell, denied bail, facing a mountain of charges that will keep them locked away for the rest of their natural lives. Justice wasn't just served, it was absolute. But the most important renovation wasn't the house. It was Lily. Healing isn't a straight line. You don't undo years of psychological torture in a week. There are still nights she wakes up crying, apologizing for things she didn't do. But I am there every morning to remind her that she is the queen of this castle, not the servant. I officially stepped down as CEO of Vance Global yesterday. I handed the reins to my board. I spent 12 years chasing money across the ocean, thinking I was building a future, only to nearly lose the present. I won't make that mistake again. My full-time job now is simply being a dad. This evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Hamptons sky in shades of violet and gold, we sat together on the newly remodeled veranda. Lily wasn't wearing a maid's uniform. She was wearing a soft, silk dress the color of the sea. Her hair was cut in a stylish bob, and her skin, once pale and bruised, was glowing with health. She took a sip of tea, looked at me, and for the first time in forever, the smile reached her eyes. "It's beautiful, Dad," she whispered. I reached over and held her hand, grateful for the warmth in her fingers. "It is," I agreed, looking at her, "not the sunset. I promised I'd give you the world, Lily. But I realize the world means nothing if you aren't happy in it." She squeezed my hand back. We didn't need to say anything else. We were safe. We were home. And we were finally, truly free. 1 year has passed since the darkness was lifted from our lives. Tonight, the Vance estate is full of guests again. But this time, there are no shallow socialites, no greedy hedge fund managers, and certainly no Hamptons. Tonight is the opening gala for the Lily Vance Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal aid and safe housing for victims of domestic abuse and financial exploitation. I stood at the back of the ballroom, the same room where I once watched my daughter scrub floors on her knees. But tonight, the floor is covered in rose petals. And standing on the stage, bathing in the warm spotlight, is Lily. She isn't hiding behind a trellis. She is standing tall at the podium, wearing a suit that screams power and grace. She speaks into the microphone with a voice that is steady and strong, captivating the room. For a long time, I thought I had lost my voice, she tells the audience, her eyes scanning the room until they lock onto mine. I thought I was defined by the name on my apron. But my father reminded me that our worth isn't written by others. It is written by us. Thunderous applause erupts. I watch her, and I realize something profound. I spent my life building skyscrapers and accumulating billions, thinking that was my legacy. I was wrong. The buildings will crumble. The money will be spent. But the strength I see in her eyes tonight, that is eternal. As for Brad and Eleanor, they are currently serving the first year of their 20-year sentences at Rikers Island. I heard Brad tries to brag to the other inmates that he used to be a CEO. Nobody believes him. He is exactly where he belongs, in a cage while my daughter learns to fly. We didn't just survive the nightmare. We used the debris to build something better. My journey taught me a brutal lesson. We often assume that the people we love are safe just because they live in big houses or drive nice cars. But abuse loves to hide behind closed doors and expensive curtains. I came home to save my daughter, but in the end, her resilience saved me, too. It taught me that it's never too late to fight for your family. It's never too late to rewrite the ending of your story. If you are watching this and you feel trapped, or if you know someone who has changed or disappeared from your life, reach out. Don't wait 12 years. Make that call today. You might just save a life. Thank you for listening to our story. If Arthur and Lily's journey inspired you, please subscribe to Inspiration Seeker. We are building a community of survivors and dreamers here. Hit that like button to help this video reach someone who needs to hear it. I'm your host, signing off. Remember, the night is always darkest just before the dawn. Stay strong and see you in the next video.